Can you guess how many people have played at least one NBA game? In all 77 years of NBA history, less than 5,000 players have ever suited up in an NBA jersey. More people have climbed Mount Everest, 6,338, or been struck by lightning than there are NBA players. So it's safe to say that making it to the NBA is one of the hardest things to do. But there are some players whose road to the league is so unbelievably tough that making it to the NBA was an absolute miracle. When Jimmy Butler was just 13 years old, his mother kicked him out of the house. "I don't like the look of you. You gotta go." Those were the last words Butler heard from his mother before he became homeless. And over the next few years, Jimmy wandered the streets, couch-surfed in countless houses, and played basketball. After a three-point shooting competition against a ninth-grade football player named Jordan Leslie, the two became best friends, and Jordan invited Jimmy to stay at his house. But Jordan's mom, Michelle Lambert, wasn't too happy about Jimmy staying over. She had 7 kids, so money and living space in her house were pretty tight. However, all her kids loved Jimmy, so soon he moved in permanently and became a member of the family. With newfound stability, Butler could focus all his energy on basketball. But to say that he was highly recruited would be a lie, because his only option was to play at junior community college, where scouts don't go unless somebody starts putting up 30 points per game. And Jimmy knew that. So that's precisely what he did. After dominating his freshman season, Butler had offers from 6 Division I colleges. He chose Marquette, and he sent the letter of intent from the local McDonald's. Still, the road to the NBA wasn't certain, and it took Jimmy 3 years at Marquette to finally work his way onto the NBA radar. Then, finally, after life as an outsider, Jimmy made it as the 30th pick in the 2011 NBA draft. But while Jimmy went from homeless to the NBA, this next superstar made it after nearly starving to death.
Watching them playing, coming to NBA, moving all around the world, championship and everything, then I was saying this is going to take us to a greater place in the future.
See, back in 2007, Giannis Antetokounmpo was selling fake sunglasses on the streets of Athens in Greece. And if anybody told you that he was going to become the NBA MVP, you'd laugh in their face. Giannis would laugh too, because after all, he didn't even play basketball. At the time, Giannis was a skinny 13-year-old who only ate once a day, sometimes twice, if he managed to sell enough sunglasses. But when a basketball coach named Spiros Valeniadis saw his long arms and legs, there was no doubt in his mind that he was looking at a future basketball superstar. However, getting discovered was just the beginning of Giannis's tough journey. Because Giannis didn't have much to eat, he was selling trinkets on the streets until he was 17. Playing in the same pair of socks and shoes that he shared with his brother. And even after 5 years of walking more than an hour to each practice and often sleeping in the gym, Giannis was still a malnourished, skinny kid and a virtual nobody who played in the 3rd-tier Greek league. But then, in 2012, Giannis's life was about to change because he finally had an agent. And in 2013, the NBA scouts would discover that long name they couldn't pronounce. Then, a few months later, against all odds, NBA Commissioner David Stern managed to pronounce it correctly.
Giannis Antetokounmpo.
But 2 years before Giannis got drafted, another player with an unusual name came to the NBA, traumatized by a tragic family story. It was Kawhi Leonard, who could have chosen a career in the NFL or easily quit sports altogether. Because his parents were divorced and his mom couldn't take him to basketball practice, Kawhi couldn't play basketball as a high school freshman. His father, Mark, wanted him to play only football. But Kawhi's love for the game of basketball was stronger than anything. However, just 2 years later, this love almost died with the sound of a gunshot. Kawhi was on his way to a basketball game when he got the call. As Mark Leonard was closing up his car wash, a stranger pulled up and fired numerous shots at Kawhi's dad, killing him on the spot. Emotionally shattered, Kawhi changed that day and became a closed-off, introverted person that rarely talks. And while most people would quit basketball or at least take a break, Kawhi is built different. Because just 24 hours after the death of his father, Kawhi suited up to play a game in his honor. And he had a very good game, finishing with 17 points. But as soon as the game ended, Kawhi broke down crying in his mother's arms. After his father's death, Kawhi worked out harder than ever. And despite being only the 48th ranked player in the country, he received a scholarship to San Diego State, where he continued to hustle, coining a famous phrase about rebounding: "Bored man gets paid." Even though his behavior and his movements were robotic, the NBA scouts were drooling at his physical attributes, extremely long arms and gigantic hands. So, after years of sacrifice, he finally got drafted and made his father proud. But the 2011 draft had another player who succeeded against all odds. And unlike Kawhi, Isaiah Thomas never had anyone drooling over his size. Okay, maybe he did, but that's personal. And we're going to stick to basketball here. Isaiah was a basketball fanatic all his life, but he always was the smallest player on every court. As a high school freshman, he stood just 5'3". So everywhere he went, they told him that he wouldn't make it. Even his parents tried to push him away from basketball, saying he was wasting his time. But a few hard fouls were doing nothing to Isaiah's self-belief. He'd always pick himself up and continue playing. Still, he was so desperate to grow that he even bought a machine that stretched him out, and another one where he'd hang upside down. However, the results were mediocre. Isaiah did eventually grow to 5'9", and while he was a standout high school player, nobody believed that he'd make the NBA. Except him. All the trash talk and naysayers kept him in the gym and made him work even harder. And after several March Madness appearances at the University of Washington, Thomas declared for the 2011 draft, where he was selected last. When he got drafted, IT was interviewed by just one reporter, as everyone believed Thomas would be just a fun little draft story that nobody's going to remember in 3 years. But just like he did all his life, IT proved everyone wrong. And 3 years later, he was averaging 20 points per game for the Kings. Then 3 years after that, he averaged 29 and made the second-team All-NBA, becoming the shortest player ever with that honor. And compared to Isaiah, this next point guard had excellent size, strength, and athleticism. But his problem wasn't physical, it was mental. He was so problematic that they called him Crazy J. His real name was John Wall, and he had one of the most unbelievable roads to the NBA. See, John grew up without a father, who was serving time in prison for second-degree murder. When John was 9, his father was released because he had a terminal illness. But 1 month later, just as John started to love having his father back in his life, he passed away right in front of him. This filled John with anger and rage, and he became a wild child. So he began committing petty crimes. And by the time he turned 13, he graduated to stealing cars. Wall was a super talented basketball player, and it was his only hope of staying out of jail. But because of his temper, he got kicked off of every team he played for. As a high school junior, John had already changed schools 3 times because of his foul mouth and cussing out coaches. But then, one moment changed his life forever. His mother spent her last dollar to buy John new basketball shoes and send him to an AAU tournament. As a result, she couldn't pay for electricity, and the whole family was in the dark for a few days just so he could play basketball. But her sacrifice finally knocked some sense into John, who vowed to take basketball seriously. Crazy J was gone, and John started playing with much more discipline. As a senior, he averaged 20 points, 9 assists, and 8 rebounds per game, and was ranked as the #1 player in the country. However, despite his success, it was hard for him to get rid of old habits. Wall and his friend were charged with breaking into an abandoned home during his senior year, and Wall avoided prison because it was his first recorded felony. And thanks to his immense talent, Wall was still able to get a scholarship, and he joined Kentucky with DeMarcus Cousins, Eric Bledsoe, and Patrick Patterson. Wall led the Wildcats in scoring and assists, averaging 16 and 6 with 2 steals. And even though they lost in the Elite Eight, John was still considered the most talented collegiate player and was selected first overall in the 2010 draft by the Washington Wizards. And in that same draft, there was another talented point guard who hoped to get drafted, but it never happened. And a lot of it had to do with his ethnicity. He was Asian, and he played at Harvard.
I was born the middle child of Asian immigrants. I graduated from Harvard with a major in economics and a minor in sociology.
Now, Asian kids from Harvard usually have a lot of job opportunities, but not as a player in the NBA. And Jeremy Lin wanted to break that mold. After he was one of the best high school players in California, Lin didn't get a single Division I offer. So he went to Harvard, where he dominated again, averaging 17 points and 5 assists with excellent shooting splits. But during the draft process, he was stereotyped again, and nobody wanted to draft a skinny Asian point guard. Lin eventually signed with the Warriors as an undrafted player, but still, he barely got any playing time and was soon cut. So he took his chances with the Rockets. But it was more of the same, and it seemed like Lin's NBA story was over, until it happened. In 2012, the Knicks were plagued by injuries, and especially thin at that point guard spot. So Lin got one more chance, and he erupted for 25 points and 7 assists. In the next game, he had 28 and 8, and the game after that, 23 and 10. Then came the game against Kobe and the Lakers, where Lin scored 38 points, after which he became the biggest sports story in America. Linsanity was born, and Jeremy became one of the most popular athletes on the planet, just 2 weeks after he slept on a friend's couch and feared getting cut from the NBA. But while Lin's basketball story was full of ups and downs, Dwyane Wade's whole life was full of ups and downs, and the ups weren't so frequent. Dwayne's mother was a drug addict, and he spent his early life in close vicinity to bags and needles. Police breaking into his home and taking his mom away was a common occurrence for Dwyane, and it wasn't surprising that his mom lost custody. At the age of 8, Wade moved in with his father. But life didn't get much better, because his dad lived in one of the most dangerous Chicago neighborhoods. So he was forced to live in constant fear of guns and violence, and the only refuge he had was basketball. Still, despite his talent, Wade struggled at school and wasn't getting any scholarships. Finally, as a senior, Wade received a scholarship from Marquette, where he blossomed into one of the best shooting guards in the country, and then got selected 5th overall in the famous 2003 NBA draft.
With the 5th pick in the 2003 NBA draft, the Miami Heat select Dwyane Wade from Marquette University.
And there was another guy who was drafted 2 spots ahead of Wade in the 2003 draft who also shared a similar life story. Carmelo Anthony grew up without a father, and at the age of 10, he and his mom moved to Baltimore, one of the most crime-infested cities in the U.S. Due to drugs and street life, Melo lost his first cousin, his stepdad, and many of his friends. So after he got cut from his high school basketball team as a freshman, it looked like Carmelo would follow the same path. But a sudden growth spurt turned Melo into a 6'8" beast, and his basketball skills allowed him to transfer to Oak Hill Academy, away from all the troubles in Baltimore. There he became one of the highest-ranked players in the country, later an NCAA champion with Syracuse, and the 3rd overall pick in the 2003 draft. But if making it to the NBA is hard for Americans, it's 10 times harder to do if you're born in Africa, which has poor basketball infrastructure and little basketball history. While there were some famous basketball players from Africa, like Hakeem, Manute Bol, or Dikembe Mutombo, they were the exception and not the norm. When Joel Embiid was 16 years old, he was already a 7-footer. But he was tall for nothing, because he had never played basketball in his life. And then, because of his height, Joel got invited to the basketball camp of Luc Mbah a Moute, who was a second-year player for the Bucks. But to say that Embiid was good would be a lie, and to say that he was bad would be an understatement. Joel was flat-out terrible, but Luc didn't want to give up on him. So he sent Joel to Florida to polish his basketball skills. But when Embiid got there, he was mocked by his teammates for a complete lack of basketball fundamentals. After a few months, Embiid was kicked off the team, and it seemed like his basketball journey was over. However, this only made him work harder, and in a few years, Joel started dominating and got a scholarship to Kansas. And some 13 years after he first touched a basketball, Embiid became the NBA MVP and one of the most skilled big men in basketball history.